Okay. Good evening, everyone. This is a call to order for the Bridgeport Board of Education special meeting held on Wednesday, September 6, 2023, 6:00 p.m. We are at Central High School. We have members that are present online and then members that are present in person. Online, we have Mr. Benahan, Ms. Baptiste Perez, Ms. Casimir. And then in present, we have Ms. Perez, Mr. Traber, Mr. Sokolovic, myself, and our superintendent, Dr. Levy David. And then we have our guest presenter this evening, Dr. Copeland. How the meeting will take place is currently right now, we don't have anyone signed up for public comment. So we're going to get right into the first agenda item. Just a heads up, board members, these are items in which there's a presentation that he will show. There will be opportunities for dialogue amongst ourselves along with Mr. Copeland, and he'll identify where those pauses are for dialogue in his presentation. Just also a reminder, these are suggestions of the board. The board at the end will make the agreement with the superintendent on what that's going to look forward, what that will look like moving forward for her.
Ms. Brown?
Hello?
Hi, Ms. Brown. Mr. McCloy just joined right now, so he is on now just to confirm for the board.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Jeff. The item says presentation and discussion of phase 5 of superintendent search firm contract by McPherson and Jacobson's firm. For many of the public that don't know, this is the very same firm that allowed us and worked with us throughout the process to hire our superintendent now. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Copeland. Mr. Copeland, you have the floor.
Well, thank you and good evening. It's been several weeks, if not a couple of months, since we've had an opportunity to engage. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep. Yes.
Super. And how's the summer going? Is it nice and cool there in Connecticut?
We're experiencing somewhat of a wave these next couple of days. It's cooler.
We're melting. We are melting.
Yeah. All right. Well, so we're all in the same pot, as it were, and because in New Jersey it's pretty hot too. As the board chair indicated, this is the final phase 5 of the recruitment process. And thank you for allowing us to participate. Not every board does, most do, but not everyone does. So kudos to you for taking the time. What I'd like to do tonight is to share with you some pretty high level examples and data that we have about what developing a high performance board and superintendent leadership team would look like on a macro level. And I say macro level because every district is different. The governing structure beneath the major layers can be different. And so not every, and your legal requirements are different in different states. The bottom line is we want to make sure that this partnership gets off on a good footing and continues for a very long time. When you first met with myself and my colleagues, you made it clear to us that you wanted somebody who wanted to be in the community. We took that very seriously. We took it very seriously when we put together the stakeholder presentation. And so I think congratulations on a good choice and a good start. And we'd just like to share with you some learnings that we've acquired over the years. And this is not a dense presentation. I believe the board chair has sent it to the board members already. So yes. I'm comfortable, as long as we don't get too bogged down in, a conversation as we go along. If that's okay, Ms. Brown.
That works. What we'll do is we'll operate as if it is our normal meeting. So if you have a question, definitely raise your hand, or board members that are in present, just let me know, raise your hand, and I will acknowledge you just so that everyone gets an opportunity to speak on whatever item is presented and there's some type of order. Your presentation has been uploaded, so if you want to have it put on the screen, we can do that right now.
Sure.
So just give them a second.
Who's helping me here with this?
Our IT team both
Dates.
online and in person.
All right, team. Thank you. Are you going to put? Can we have it in slide show mode, or is this the most comfortable for you?
1 second. 1 second. While he's doing that, I just felt to read out the points that you will address for the public. So part of this specific phase, we will highlight tonight the role of the superintendent, the role of the board, expectations by the board. By the board of the superintendent, expectations by the superintendent of the board, communication, tips for the board and superintendent, and then the last one is establishing performance objectives and goals. So I just want to read that into the record.
Okay, great. Thank you. For next slide. Thank you. As I had indicated, we know that this is a joint responsibility of the board and the superintendent. The board as the policy-making legislative body, and the superintendent as the individual who needs to put that into action and has the overall day-to-day operation of the district. And as it says here, for the boards of education and superintendent to establish a positive working relationship, a mutual one of respect and support. And that's helped if we can all agree on what the boundaries are, the parameters, as well as the expectations. And also knowing what the roles are going to be, and so that they're clearly defined from the board and the superintendent. So for example, some superintendents for some committee meetings will have cabinet members who will act as liaisons. There's a board chair. There's also committee members. Knowing how they interact and what the expectations for those interactions are can be really helpful. And let me just go on to say that, and I think I said this, or one of us, the consultants might have said this in the beginning, there's a dwindling number of people who want to go into the superintendency because of a lot of different reasons. Well, there's a dwindling number of people who want to be on boards for some of the same reasons. And we think that if there's a good working relationship, it's one that has some lasting power, and that's the benefits of the district. So let's talk about the role of the superintendent. Next slide. And some of these are not going to be any surprise to you. In no particular order, but the first one listed, be responsible for setting the standard for ensuring rigorous academic progress. Superintendent's the one that's going to be out there talking the most about what's most important, and that's the academic progress of students. Be active in building alliances and partnerships. Now, when we first began, we had stakeholder meetings. That was the meetings that the district said, these are folks that we know are out there. There may be others, and this may be a good opportunity for the superintendent to get out in the community and say, yeah, we've got those building alliances, but there are other ones that are out there also. But then number three, to bring the Board of Education in on the partnerships, so that the superintendent's not out there, it's nothing wrong with building alliances, but building alliances with the board is an important part of it. Want to be seen as a coalition builder, superintendent does, concerned with the big picture, and making sure that people who are disagreeing don't have to be disagreeable. They can come together and be part of a positive growth. Continually communicates that education is the backbone of our democratic society. If we don't believe that, I think we're in the wrong business. And then be visible in community at events in the classroom. Roll up your sleeves, join the ranks. One of the activities that I had besides working for McPherson and Jacobson is I act as a mentor for aspiring superintendents. I act as a mentor for superintendents who are going through their national certification program through the American Association for School Administrators. And I can remember, oh gosh, it's got to be about 7 or 8 years ago now, somebody who was going into a large district, county district, about 40, 50,000 students. We talked about finances and we talked about all different kinds of things. And he, which happened to be a he, as we were closing out the conversation, said to me, "Do you have any final suggestions for me?" And I said, "Well, since you asked, make sure you go to a girls' field hockey game." And he laughed and said, "You're serious?" And I said, "I'm really serious. Everybody goes to the football games. Pay the girls some respect. First of all, you'll be the only superintendent who ever did it. And secondly, it'll show just by being there that you respect them, you respect their activities. So being visible is critically important." The next slide. The role of the board is to articulate the school system goals, be proactive in improving education in their respective communities. The biggest job you had, you just did. Selection and evaluation. What you will do is evaluation of the superintendent. And adoption of operating policies, and to serve your full constituencies, not just the most vocal ones. I don't know if members of the Bridgeport Board are also members of different organizations, Rotary, civic associations, and so forth. And I know your time is taken up hugely with being on the board, but if those organizations could have Board of Education members who are championing the school district at those monthly meetings, Chamber of Commerce meetings, Kiwanis Club meetings, those kinds of things, if they're asking for somebody from the board to give a speech about the board goals, and is that something you folks participate in?
Honestly, I want to say most of the board members currently sitting are involved in quite a few different areas within the city and even outside of the city. Each of them, just from recollection, serve at different capacities within the community. I think that's what makes our board very diverse, is that everyone has like a key role in the community in some way or another.
You know what? Kudos to you, because I can't tell you that sometimes people get so focused on the board, they don't realize that they're ambassadors of the school district. And that doesn't mean that everything is cheery. It can be, hey, listen, the board and the superintendent agree, here are areas of growth, but we're working on it. And people want to hear that. People want to know that even where there are areas of need, the board and the superintendent are working together. So that's the board. Always remember, the relationship between the board and the superintendent should be one of mutual respect and confidence. There should be no surprises or hidden information between the superintendent and the board. And we'll talk later on about communication a little bit, but getting that working relationship. I'm not going to surprise you with something. You don't surprise me with something. We want to work together. We want people to realize that they were right in electing the board, and the board was right in electing the superintendent. Let me stop on those 2 points. Any comments, discussion points?
What I'll do is I'll go around. Mr. Sokolovin.
Yeah. First thing I'd like to mention is Connecticut. We got additional roles as far as being responsible for approving the budget and interacting with the budget. It falls on our plate. And second, with the communication and the surprise to the Board of Education and being on one page, it needs to be clear in the roles that there is a disagreement between the board and the superintendent. It's 5 votes in the board that exactly prevail in most cases.
Could you repeat the last part, sir? I didn't quite hear that.
When there's a difference of opinion or strategies between the board and the superintendent, it needs to be clear, since we're establishing roles, that 5 members of the board would decide the issue that's being debated or in contention between the board and the superintendent. Because the superintendent is an employee of the board. It's the only employee in the system that we can direct.
Sure. And I think I'm not suggesting that there's not going to be a time when the superintendent may have a recommendation that the board can't support. I think it's the way the conversation takes place and the explanations back and forth. Look, and I'll be talking about this a little bit, later. One of the responsibilities of the superintendent is to be able to give clear, recommendations. And listen, I've been a superintendent in 3 different districts, there were times that I'd make a recommendation, and the board as a whole might not like that recommendation, and they'll say, okay, we've heard from the superintendent, we've heard from the administration, we're going to go a different direction. It's the superintendent's responsibility to say, okay, if that's where the board as a whole wants to go, or the majority of the board wants to go, then I have a responsibility to make their decision the right one. So that may come up. It's just how that comes up that I think will have a lasting effect on the relationship between the board and the superintendent.
Thank you.
Fair enough?
Fair. What I'll do, just want to take a moment to acknowledge those board members that are currently now in person, Ms. Baptiste Perez, Mr. Benahan, and let the record reflect Mr. Yellen has joined us. What I'm going to do, Mr. Copeland, is I'm going to continue to go around. So board members ask if they have any questions. I'm going to skip the ones that just came in, if you just take a moment, and then I'll come back to you guys. Mr. Traber, any comments on this? Ms. Perez, any comments? All right, now, Ms. Casimir, are there any comments on what was discussed so far?
No comments so far. Thank you.
No problem. Ms. Baptiste Perez, any comments on what was discussed so far? No. Mr. Benahan, any comments on what was discussed so far?
No, Ms. Morgan, Madam Chair, thank you.
No problem. And Mr. Gellin, any comments? All right, Mr. Copeland, I have no comments. Mr. Copeland, I'm sorry, Dr. Levy David, do you have any comments? Okay, now we can resume.
Okay, great. Let's go to the next slide then. Talk a little bit about expectations by the board of the superintendent. As I had mentioned, execution of policy. The board has the right to expect the virtuous execution of policy. All policies, not just those the superintendent is in agreement with. So there are going to be different policies that come up. They'll be debated. I don't know if you have a policy committee. Most boards do. But generally, the policies can be vigorously discussed at the policy committee, and then they come to the board, and the superintendent has the responsibility to say, here's what I think you ought to do, and the board may agree or not agree. And as I indicated before, the superintendent's responsibility is to put forth the policy that the board decides, and then to make sure that the policy is successful. The boards of education have the right to expect the superintendent to give it their full support and to make their decision the right decision. Decisions, the board has the right to expect the superintendent to refrain from making decisions the board should make. And I will tell you that doesn't happen that much in my experience, but sometimes it does. And sometimes there's not clarity as to what is a board decision and what's a superintendent's decision. And I can remember having a discussion with the board about, and I can't remember why, but there was a possible change of calendar. And the board was like, well, if this happens, you go ahead and change the calendar. And I said, I can only change the calendar when there's a school emergency. Otherwise, you've got to take a vote on the change of calendar. So there was a minor misunderstanding about what the superintendent really had the authority to do and what really the board had the authority to do. Sometimes, and again, not every district is the same. In my 3 districts, the board general counsel, or in Pennsylvania, we call him a solicitor, sat in at board business meetings, and we could depend on board counsel to clarify some of those boundaries. Do you do that in Bridgeport?
We do.
Okay.
We actually have a session coming up with legal in the next couple of weeks, but we actually have, whenever there's a gray area or an area that's not understood, counsel does come.
Okay, good. I think that's so those are the expectations of the board. So between those 2, Oh, let me go on to the next next slide, I think. Okay, as I said, recommendations. Right, expect the superintendent to make clear and concise recommendations based on available information. I've seen some superintendents, I'm afraid, who will say, well, here's the information on this side of the aisle, and this is the information on the other. Now you've got both pieces of information. You, board, go make the decision or make the recommendation. I've always counseled, that's really not fair. You can't play it like that. Make a recommendation and then deal with the fact that it may not go your way, but you should have a recommendation each time. Sharing, the board has the right to expect the superintendent to share in the hard work and blame as well as the credit. You know, it doesn't always happen that way. And to be honest with you, it's mostly the superintendent who takes the blame, and that's just the way it is. And you deal with that. I don't know what COVID was like in Bridgeport, but in Pennsylvania, at one point, one of the board solicitors who was working with the county recommended that the boards pass resolutions giving the superintendent sort of superpowers to make decisions during COVID. And a couple of us were like, we're not so sure we want superpowers. We'd kind of like to not be out there all by ourselves. And most of the boards were like, oh no, you take it. And that's what happened. But we got through it. Teamwork, the board has the right to expect the superintendent to conduct all official business with the board as a whole. And so that doesn't mean to me that a board member can't ask the superintendent a question. What I've recommended to folks is if I get an email from a board member, I generally respond and copy the board chair. If I get an inquiry from a board member, I generally respond to the board member and then let the board chair know. That's a local decision that you guys should come up with and make a decision as to how you want to handle that. That's the best practice that I've seen. I can't say there's a law about it, but it's something that you ought to decide at some point about how you want that communication to flow, so that everybody is aware of it. So let me, and then support. The board has the right to expect the superintendent to be responsible for building confidence and respect for the board by supporting the board action. Believe it or not, I've seen superintendents, particularly in labor situations, you know, try and make the board the bad guy, and that's not a way to go. So I think the board should be able to expect that kind of support. Let me stop there. Questions, conversations?
Sure. Ms. Baptiste, any comments, questions? I'll pass. Mr. Koenig, any comments or questions?
Yes, just a point of note for clear, concise recommendations based on available information, past practice, and policy. The city has a history of bad past practices that we're trying to get away from. So I think one of the expectations would be just to stick to policy as is, because in the past there's been a lot of problems with practices. I mean, we've gotten, literally in my 6 years on the board, contracts signed, brought to the board after they're signed and ready for at least 7 or 8 times. That's a very bad practice, past practice, and there's probably a few other ones that I can't think of right now, but I would like to stay away from things being done just because it's past practice, because we always haven't had the best past practices.
Right. Now, I missed some of that. I thought you said something about the city.
In the city, just in the city and as a board. I've been on the board for 6 years, and in this city, there have been contracts brought to us already signed, sometimes 3 months in, 5 months in, 6 months in, and then they were brought to us for approval, and what are we approving?
Right. So again, this is something that I would recommend that the board general counsel and the superintendent sit down and have that conversation. What is it? What is the expectations going forward? In my last district, we were clear about what the threshold for superintendent approving certain contracts or certain invoices were up to a certain amount. That was part of board policy. There was also the ability within our policy, if there were emergent issues, a tree falls during a hurricane and you need to have it cleared so the kids can go to school. You can't wait to have a board meeting to decide. The superintendent has to be able to hire somebody to get that stuff taken care of so the kids can come into school. So knowing what the parameters are and then operating with goodwill around that, I would definitely recommend, if that's an area that the board sees as something going forward, they want to readdress or change in terms of practices, then I think you should do that ahead of time. Same thing with board policy. One of the things that I always used to ask boards to do is not waive board policy. I can remember a time going way back when a parent came and made a real strong argument for letting their child come to school before the kindergarten acceptance age. And they made a real strong plea for that, but the policy was here's the date of demarcation. And the board waived the policy. And I was like, I really wouldn't do that. If you're going to do that, you ought to amend the policy to take into consideration whatever it was compelling about what the parents said. But they were like, no, it's not going to be a problem. And of course, the next board meeting, there were 5 other people who came with, a similar story. So my recommendation to boards is, you're going to waive a policy, amend it around the reason you waived it. If you've got a practice that has been given, the superintendent has been given directions in the past, now's the time to be clear as a board how you want to go forward. Fair enough?
Thank you.
Fair. Mr. Bennett?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going back what Mr. Joseph Clark said, and one of the best thing in the best case is have communication with each other. Because without communication, we're not going to have success, so we're not going to go nowhere. I know sometimes things are not going right, they're not perfect, and I always say perfect's only God. But if we get our communication and we talk to each other, what we're going to do, the next process or the next meeting or the next whatever we're going to have to do, it's much better to be prepared so we can know what we're going to do outside. Because without communication, we're going to ask each one member, we're going to say why, how, when, he, she, when this happened. That's the bad thing. So I just want to be sure for the record, and I ask Mr.
Sure, and we
Joseph
can talk
to
about
say,
this. We can talk about this now. We can talk about it. When we talk about communications, but
Yeah, let me finish. Let me finish, please. I'm
I'm
finished.
sorry.
Thank you. And as I say, good communication is a great success. So I just want to say that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Go ahead. You wanted to respond, Mr. Copeland?
Yeah, I think that's one of the areas that there get as much clarity on communications as you can. And when I say clarity, I've always advised, and I've sat down and had the discussion with the board. How do you want to hear about issues that take place in the district, and how often? And what are the circumstances? Because I've had board members, while an emergent situation taking place because their child had a cell phone, is saying, I need to know about this. And I'm saying, I need to fix it first before I communicate what's going wrong. So knowing those boundaries and knowing what the expectations are, I think are important going forward.
Thank you. Mr. Traber, any comments?
Yeah, I would just say to Mr. Sokolovic that I understand that the board has been for the last year or more trying to establish clearer policies because the city has a history and the district has a history of having contradictory policies. And so the board's trying to establish clearer policies so that we have, unquestionable practices that we want to follow. But there are always going to be past practices that we also want to know about and that we will be followed. And sometimes it will become necessary to put those practices into writing when they become important enough. And there will be other times that past practice will prevail, but we need to communicate about that. And I think Mr. Banahan's correct about that. There was a practice at the convocation that was changed. And as I understand it, the superintendent was unaware of the participation of the unions in the convocation. So we do need to make sure that we do communicate about that. And I don't know the full story about how that happened, but I've been asked a lot since then about how it happened. So the practices of the past need to be discussed, and we need to be communicating because I wasn't spoken to till after it was done. And I could have shed some light on that. So I think we need to have both. And we need to have what Mr. Banahan talked about, which is good communication.
Would you like to respond, Mr. Copeland?
In terms of the what I heard with the contracts, is there a procurement officer in the district, or does that just fall under the business?
I'm not speaking about the contracts. I'm just saying that in general, we need to have policies, and there was a discussion about a policy that you may be referring to. I'm just referring to there are all kinds of things that come up. That discussion has occurred, and that's been dealt with. I'm just saying there are also practices which occur in various schools and situations, and at the convocation, there was another past practice that was changed too. And so we need to communicate about these things. And we just need to, as you stated several times here already, we need to make sure that we're talking and communicating and working as a team.
Sure, fair enough.
I'm agreeing with you, and I'm agreeing with Mr. Banahan about that.
Ms. Perez, no comments? Mr. Gellan, any comments? Ms. Casimir, any comments?
Yes. Mr. Robert, what do you do about, I'm just speaking hypothetically, what if there are board members that technically don't want the superintendent in place? They didn't vote for her, they weren't interested in having her hired, and then her or him hired. And then once they do get hired, certain board member or certain board members, and this is hypothetically speaking, just kind of like nitpick at every single thing that the superintendent is trying to accomplish. We're talking about communication, so I just want to ask the question of what happens when it's obvious that there are certain board members that it doesn't matter what she or he does as a superintendent, they're always going to complain about it. They're always going to have something to say about it. And I just wanted to know like what your feedback is. And again, I'm not pointing anybody out. I'm just asking this question so I can be educated as a board member as to what are the steps that, you know, one can take if they're so big on communication, but then they're, you know, kind of blocking what the superintendent is doing. And again, I'm not talking about anybody in particular. I'm just asking you as a professional about your opinion, because I know you've been through this before.
So if you go to the next slide, since you're helping me with my presentation, the second one talks about support. Says the superintendent has the right to expect full support from the board as long as they are the superintendent of schools. board should employ an individual worthy of their trust and confidence and then provide full support. Doesn't mean agreement, doesn't mean that there can't be full-throated disagreements, but I would argue that once that individual is in place and they're following the goals of the district, even though they might not have been the first choice, they're the ones who are there now. And if the district is going to be successful, you have to move forward. What happens if that doesn't happen? Well, what I've advised superintendents is you need to have a conversation with the board leadership and, if necessary, the board as a whole, to be able to, in executive session, work out whatever the issues are, because it's just not healthy. Does that always happen? No, it doesn't. And sometimes it just creates more angst. But that would be my recommendation moving forward. Is that helpful at all to you?
Yes, it is helpful. It's just, you know, it would be really nice to just kind of like, in a situation like this, to wave out the PTSD from the last superintendent, or from the way that you know, these particular board members view the superintendent, and just give the new person a clean slate. Because, you know,
this was hypothetical.
yeah, definitely hypothetical still. I'm sorry. Yes, I'm finished.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I actually, before I go back to Ms. Baptiste-Perez, for me, just looking at a lot of this is the matter of communication amongst board members, and also having that communication with the superintendent. And I know that this is a fresh start for most of us with the new superintendent, so building that communication, what that looks like. And I know we'll cover communication towards the ending of this presentation, but what those expectations of communication look like, I think that has a lot to do with it as well. And, you know, we'll get there when we get there, but I think all of this entire conversation on these specific items is very important to know that what is being said and what is being heard, making sure that it's exactly what's being heard and exactly what's being said. So that everyone's voice matters, but also too, everyone is accountable for what they say and how they say it, so that business of the board can get done. And we're not focusing on like little things here or there, but we're actually moving as a unit. So I thought that just highlighting some of those areas, and for board members who this is their first time being on the board, I think that's important, but also to reminding those that have been here for a while the same thing. So that's my point of view. Ms. Baptiste-Perez?
Well, my first question, Mr. Copeland, is when does the communication start for a new superintendent in the school district, and who would be the first, I guess, person in the chain of command in terms of the school board to dictate or at least communicate that this is the expectations? And I need to understand it, like timing.
Could you repeat from the beginning, please? It broke up a little bit.
My question is, when does communication start for a new superintendent in terms of expectations from the board, and who should be the individual to communicate that?
Well, I think that I would recommend that the board as a whole have that conversation with the superintendent. The superintendent, in this case, started July 1st. And let me just, I've had 3 superintendents.
August 1st.
Was it August 1st?
Yes.
Okay, even so, it's been even more recent. My first superintendency began like January 20th. And it was like, oh my gosh, and we've got a board vote, we've got a budget vote in a couple of months. My second one was October. So the budget had already been done and so forth. My third one began July 1st, and I said, oh, great, I get to be here in the summer. The only problem was I was the only one there, and everybody else was on vacation. And so when it came to looking at goals, and it came to looking at some of those things, I think that, and starts, it was difficult. So we had a retreat, an executive session retreat, right around September and worked out some of those issues around communication. The board general counsel would always meet with new board members when they were elected, and we would go over those. The board president, the board general counsel, and myself, and sometimes other cabinet members would do orientation for board members when they came on. And if there were problems, I depended on the board to support me, and I depended on the board to work out in other words, the superintendent can't be responsible for those kinds of concerns. That has to be a board leadership issue or a board as a whole, and then a communications decision from the board. So, for example, some boards have policies, this is a different kind of communication, I think, that dictates who can speak to the press. Some boards have policies about when you speak for the board as a whole and when you speak for yourself. Some boards don't feel it necessary for that. It may be something that this board wants to have a discussion around. Is that helpful?
Yes. I have one other question. And then I have a question in terms of communication. This is another hypothetical. But for boards that struggle with the difference of how much public information should be given to the public and what is transparency, how would you advise boards with sensitive information to actually receive and communicate that with the superintendent? Maybe boards may over disclose information that could be discussed and resolved with a simple phone call instead of, for example, just subjecting everything to FOIA.
Yeah, that's really a question for your general counsel, and here's why. In some states, particularly if it's a personnel issue, the board has to sit as an adjudicator in the process. And if the board members are too involved in the communication of the issue around personnel, they then have to recuse themselves, and it becomes a problem down the line. That's really, the clarity on that is really something that has to come from your general counsel. So as I indicated, I don't have a problem in the places that I've been if a board member says to me, hey, listen, here's what I'm hearing. Thanks. And I'll make a decision as to whether this rises to the level as to whether I would call the board chair or not, or so forth. Most of the time I do. I say, yeah, okay. And then I call the board chair and say, let me tell you, I had a conversation with such and such board member. They gave me a heads up on something. I'm going to follow through, and I'll let the board as a whole know about it. It might not be anything that couldn't be, you don't want to over litigate the situation. I would advise you, and I appreciate the hypotheticals, but I would advise you to bring the actuals in an executive session with your general counsel to work out how you want to go moving forward with those kinds of communications. Fair enough?
Yes. And then my last question in terms of communication, it's really your opinion regarding best practices for board members, especially with a new superintendent. Is it good to limit or exclude certain forms of communication with the new superintendent? So, for example, please do not communicate with me over a phone call. I will only accept emails. Is that the best way for a board member to move forward with communicating with a superintendent?
I think it goes back to it depends. I don't know that if it's all the time, if that's necessary. But I need to know more about what the circumstances were.
Oh, I don't know. It's hypothetical, so.
Yeah, I've heard hypothetical 4 times now. And I don't own the Brooklyn Bridge, try as I might.
Right. If there are no further questions, Mrs. Sokolovic?
Yes, as far as, you mentioned something about executive session and go and retreats, and that would be illegal in the state of Connecticut. We cannot do that under Freedom of Information Act. Anytime we have a convening of the board, even it actually expressly states retreats are as part of that. You can get legal advice behind closed doors, but that would be about it. And let me give you a hypothetical. Say a board had a new superintendent in place for approximately 31 days, and it was one disagreement with that superintendent. Would that constitute always nitpicking?
Okay, this is hypothetical number 5.
Correct, sir.
And since I'm skeptical of the hypothetical adjective, I would say generally no. Here's what I would say. Whatever's taken place in the past, why don't you leave it in the past and come together and move forward for the sake of the district? That's what I would do.
That's a great hypothetical solution that should be hypothetically taken into account and hypothetically put into practice.
Thank you. If there are no further comments.
I do.
Okay, Ms. Baptiste-Perez?
Let's say that's come up in hypothetically 31 days and hypothetically 3 different agenda items. Does that change your hypothetical answer?
I know this is the first time you've had the opportunity to discuss this. And I mean this sincerely, I've watched you guys, there's a lot of passion here. What I'm asking you to do is to move forward. You've got a really good superintendent. You've got really good intentions as a board. You wanted us to go out and you really wanted us to find somebody you could work with. It's only been a month and a half or whatever it's been. I think this is your opportunity to hit the reset button and move forward. That's what I think. If you look at number 3 under unit operation, the superintendent has the right to expect the board to operate as a unit or a team, not as individual factions. Those who elect to violate this practice do so at the cost of efficiency and sound administrative practice. So if you're going to move forward, it's got to be as a unit. And there are times that I've had to say to board members, I hear you. Now I need to hear the voice of the full board. And we're not going to move forward until I have the voice of the full board. And I just finished working in a district which will go unnamed with a board member who basically wanted the superintendent to hire an administrator and was pressuring the superintendent to hire an administrator. And I said, you need to bring this to the attention of the full board. In my case, in my first superintendency, I had 2 board members who wanted me to recommend a civil engineer. And I was getting, constant calls from these 2 board members about hiring a particular civil engineer. And I finally said, that's not my recommendation, but it's not my money. If that's what you want to do, let's bring it before the whole board. And it was like, oh, no, we don't want the whole board to see it. And I said, well, then we're not. We're done. It's over with. The board, the superintendent has a right to expect the board to operate as a unit.
We have one more, Mr. Copeland. Mr. Traver?
Mr. Copeland, is it reasonable to assume that if somebody voted for the other candidate, that they don't support this superintendent?
No, it's possible,
Thank
but
you.
it's not necessarily. Look, I've been lucky in that I've had 3 superintendencies and I've had 9-0 votes, but I knew that I didn't have all 9 members. I knew I had members that I wasn't the first choice. They decided to vote yes for the sake unanimity. And I've, said, look, I'll work hard to get your support.
And just to be clear, the reason I asked that question is I'm one of those ones who publicly voted for the other candidate. And when I met with the superintendent, I was upfront with her about my vote and the reason for it and my willingness and desire to work with her to make her succeed. And I still will state that on the record here in this meeting. My vote has nothing to do with my willingness to have her succeed or not succeed in this role today. So anyone that wants to suggest otherwise should talk to me about it because I'm tired of hearing that. So I support the superintendent and I intend to continue supporting it. That doesn't mean I will agree with her on what she does, everything she does. Doesn't mean I will disagree with her on everything that she does. So I'm leaving the land of hypotheticals, Mr. I'm going into the land of realities, which is that we've had some disagreements and we've had some agreements, and we will continue. But that's exactly what we're doing here. And I think that some of the points that you brought up here about the importance of bringing in the Board of Ed, about the importance of not having surprises, about the importance of communicating and working with the board as a whole, we need to work on some things. And I agree with you about that. And it's not any one faction or group or individual or hypothetical situation. There are some problems that we need to try and work out.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Copeland, you can continue.
Sure, we go to the next slide. Superintendent has the right to expect all board members to deal with school personnel through their offices. This is one that comes up, quite frankly, frequently, particularly around school personnel, people who have lived in the community a long time, gone to the schools. There's real strength in that kind of community cohesion. There's also the ever-present issue of letting the administration deal with the situation and the board not getting themselves involved in it. And I think that goes without saying. And I've mentioned some of the perils that can take place depending on what level of involvement the board has to take in personnel issues as a whole later on. Again, a conversation with your general counsel. Protection. This is one that I think is sometimes misunderstood. The superintendent has the right to expect the board to protect them against unwarranted demands and excessive or criticism. That's not to say that the board has to act as a shield for the superintendent. I am a once a year tennis fan, and that's when the U.S. Open is in New York. And there's a quote that they're using from Billie Jean King, and it says, "Pressure is a privilege." The job of the superintendent is a tough one, but it shouldn't be made, I would argue, more tough when there's unrealistic demands that are placed on the superintendent. What does that mean? I was working with a district one time where a particular board member wanted to discuss security guard rotations, where they were, what the incidents were, and expected the superintendent to collect huge amounts of data around those kinds of things. And I argue that was an unwarranted demand on their time, and that was something the superintendent should push back on and say the board as a whole really needs to say that's an unwarranted demand of time. From time to time, there are outside pressures from different groups who are more than just upset, but can be problematic. And I think that's where the board has a responsibility to stand up and say, listen, the superintendent's acting within their scope of responsibilities, and we support the superintendent. But it's a tough job, and you need to have a thick skin if you're going to do it. And then finally, evaluation. The superintendent has the right to expect a fair, timely, and honest evaluation. The evaluation must reflect concerns related to job performance and not individual bias. And I think we've talked around some of these things. We'll talk about them more as we look at the goals going forward. So that, anything about that section that anyone wants to discuss?
Ms. Baptiste, Mr. Sokolovich?
Yes. As far as school personnel, we have a recently changed policy where we used to have to seek permission from the superintendent. As board members, we need information from certain individuals, especially when we come around to budget cuts time, because this was an issue in the last round of budget cuts, 2018. Whereas we wanted to cut certain positions and the board didn't know what their jobs were. So of course we had to reach out and talk to them, find out their job position, what they did and all this and that. Because depending solely on the superintendent at that time's word that this would be the least likely cut, couldn't really determine if you were getting the actual full scope of the job or an unbiased view. So the research that we've got to talk to district personnel, and if there's a problem down the line with, for instance, I've been under, it's my fourth superintendent. So one of the last three superintendents was a very rocky relationship with staff, and everything was supposedly hunky-dory and some real issues with what the superintendent was doing and questions. Some of it would go to contracts, some of it would go to something else. So if we cannot, say we got a principal or school, for an example, wants to complain about something that superintendent in the past has done. So I would, under the past protocols, it would be, I'm going to use Dr. Levy-David just for an example, not that it's happening. Dr. Levy-David, I got to talk to the principal at, say, Allen School. There's been a complaint about you. And then she would say no, because we needed permission and we couldn't do it because that was the old bylaw. Now the new bylaw is if I want to talk to the principal of Howland, I would just tell Dr. Levy-David that I'm going to be speaking to the superintendent of Howland. I mean the principal of Howland. So there are reasons for board members to talk to staff, but in no way, we changed the policy because in no way should we be seeking permission from our employee to do anything. I just want to point that out. And as far as protection of the superintendent, absolutely, we need to protect the superintendent. For example, there was a lot of social media pressure for the decision to make half days. I've seen, I know it would go both ways because closing a school or changing a schedule for half days, you're gonna make probably 40 to 60% of the people upset in one way, shape, or form, whether you did or didn't. So that's a no-win situation, and I should have no business if I hear from 100 people who say she shouldn't have closed the schools then. That's a non-factor because that's a tough decision and it's out of our, and that should never come into the evaluation. If somebody tells me she did the best she could.
So you've got a policy that mediates or that legislates how boards interact with personnel.
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. Benahan?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I always say this and I always repeat it. That's the living day we have 9 board members that we had to protect her and defend her. Because I know social media and people like to talk crap and BS, a lot of things. They don't know what we do to protect her. That's why we 9 board members vote for her. To be sure she are the superintendent of Bristol School. And I'm very happy, we're very happy, and so far she's doing her job. We have better communication. Yes, we had to have much better communication, but everything is step by step, little by little, and we're going to have it. But I want to be sure for the record that people social media like to attack, and they don't know what the board members are doing to be sure the information going out. Especially, we have to protect our superintendent of the school. So I want to put that for the record. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Traber? No comment. Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Press? Mr. Gellin? Ms. Casimir?
Yeah, my question is more on a macro perspective, protecting the board, and this might be something for the attorney, but I just wanted to ask you, in your experience, do you have a good number of school boards that have actual directors and officers insurance? I'm not talking about regular liability. I'm talking about directors and officers insurance that protects each and every single board member in case there is a serious lawsuit launched against us. I'm concerned about some of the posts that go on Facebook with a certain board member, and I have assets and the rest of the board has assets and property that I'm sure that they would like protected. Is that something that you think is necessary, and have you seen it?
It's part of it's part of code in New Jersey, and it's partially covered in code in Pennsylvania. And boards generally carry some level of insurance protection against liability. But you're right, that is a question for your attorney. I wouldn't be surprised if you don't have some protection now.
Thank you.
Ms. Baptiste Perez?
No question.
All right, you can continue.
Next slide. This is just beginning of some things that we say are effective activities for superintendents, but we want boards to be aware of them. And there's nothing exotic here, so I'll move through them fairly quickly. Envisioning ideals for the district and creatively developing strategies to work towards those ideals and solve problems. That's an ongoing issue, and quite frankly, one of the more enjoyable parts of the job. Setting personal goals and regularly assessing personal achievements, working to maintain physical and emotional wellness, establishing a personal schedule that maximizes their effectiveness. That's tough, particularly for a new superintendent who wants to be everywhere all the time. Regularly participating in professional growth activities. I really encourage new superintendents, particularly if they're coming from out of state, to get involved in their state organization, and for the board to support them getting involved in the state association so that they really have people who they can talk to on a regular basis. Demonstrating the highest standards of moral, ethical, and professional conduct, which serves as a model for those being led, which builds trust in the leader, exchanging ideas with others through the use of effective communication skills, especially listening. And listening is going to be a major issue for the year coming up. Next slide. Continuing with effective superintendents, equitably dealing with all members of the district, thus assuring that all are treated fairly and that all students have maximum opportunities to learn. Sounds easy, but what's equitable as opposed to equal, it's hotly debated. Encouraging collaboration and participation from everyone in the district, including students. I used to bring back, I met with student leaders at the high schools. We only had 2 high schools in my last district, and met with them a few times a year. And I also brought back kids who had left the district for 2 years. And I wanted to know, how'd we do? You were out there in the world. Did we do right by you? It's not only a lot of fun, I learned a tremendous amount about the district that way. Empowering staff to succeed by encouraging goal setting, offering in-service training, and providing appropriate information. I've had aspiring administrator academies, worked with assistant principals. Facilitating evaluation of the outcomes of the district to assure that students are learning, that district goals are being achieved, and enhancing the self-esteem of those being led. This is achieved through demonstrating belief in others' abilities and showing concern for their individual needs and their successful accomplishments. So those are really some high-level kinds of things that we think are important for superintendents. Next slide is communication, which we've talked a lot about. Honesty and trust will develop. A strong district image will emerge. Nothing generates confidence among the public and professional staff more than a united front on the part of the board and the superintendent. I had when I was in New Jersey, we had a New Jersey school board's rep who would come to our meetings, and she would say, you know, imagine that you're in Macy's window and people are watching you, and if you're, you know, yelling at each other back and forth, they're going to say, why are we giving these people our money? You know, you want to come across as a strong image. Again, doesn't mean you don't have honest disagreement, but people are watching, and it feeds into the community. Then teamwork emerges as a rule, not the exception. I don't think that, from what I've heard tonight, that we're going to solve the communications problem, or issues, I should say problem, communication issues that many of you have brought up. I'm hoping that as a result of tonight, you'll set that perhaps as a board goal when you do your own self-evaluation. Madam Board Chair, is that a possibility?
It is. It's actually, we have a training that's coming up that will identify individual board members as far as like evaluation, but definitely as a board, creating that responsibility amongst board members for their role in communication amongst the superintendent. So it is, yes.
Good. Next slide, please. Just some tips for board members. I think I've talked about pretty much all of these. Remember, authority rests with the entire board. Don't let disagreement enter into personality issues. Let the superintendent deal with personnel issues. You've addressed that there are some policies that you have around that. Make an effort to be informed, which is, I talked about really early on, about being out and about in the community, and welcoming people to see you about school issues, but be prepared to direct them to the right person. As a school board, I'm sure you've got people who regularly come to the board meetings, and I'm sure you hear from regular people. One of the things that I found is there are a lot of people out there that see this massive bureaucracy and don't know how to navigate it. And I've had board members be really helpful by having conversations with people. No, you're going to the wrong person. Go to this person, go to that person. They'll be able to help you. And I've been comfortable with them bringing that to me, and then I would direct them, because sometimes the voices that we don't hear are the voices that need us the most. Let me stop there. Any comments before we talk about or get into goals?
Sure. Ms. Baptiste-Perez. Mr. Sokolovic, any
We're gonna
comments?
pass until Ms. Baptiste-Perez has this.
Thank you.
Mr. Binningham,
I pass for now.
Mr. Traver, Ms. Perez, Mr. Gillen, Ms. Casimir,
Nothing, thank you.
Ms. Perez, Ms. Baptiste-Perez, I'm sorry,
Pass.
Mr. Sokolovic.
Pass.
All right. We'll go around one more time, and between you two, you can decide if either you would like to speak or we'll move on to the next item. Ms. Baptiste-Perez?
I'm sorry, I'm going to excuse myself because I have an important work email that I'm responding to, but it seems like there's great value to my opinion, although all of our voices are equal. So I'm passing again so I can respond to this issue, but I will comment. If there's no further comment, I'll try and comment at a different time.
Mr. Sokolovic?
I think we can move on to the next issue.
All right. Mr. Copeland, please respond.
So the next one, the next slide, role of the Board of Education. I think we've talked about this, goals, policy.
Sorry. Hold on, Mr. Copeland. Miss Dr. Levy-David, I apologize.
I do have a comment.
Sure.
I think that this meeting is a great opportunity for myself and the board to establish the type of relationship that we're going to have moving forward, and how we're actually going to get to the work of what the theme is for this year, which is rising together. I've heard a lot of talk about past experiences, past practice, past trauma, past corruption, negativity, paranoia. I've heard a lot of talk about the past. I do not exist in the past. I am the brand new superintendent for Bridgeport Public Schools. And I have been here unofficially a little bit over a month. And in that time, I've had a tremendous amount of communication with members of the community, members of our elected officials. Actually just met with the president of Bridgeport University today. And my entire reason for waking up every day is to do what is best to turn this district around and help our students to be successful. That is my sole focus. And that is where all of my actions spring from. Coming to this community has been a dream come true for me. It's been an outstanding experience. Everywhere that I go, I'm reminded of why I chose to come to Bridgeport. The unfortunate part of this transition for me has been the conflict, mean-spiritedness, and pettiness that I see displayed in the behaviors on this board. And I requested this meeting specifically so that we could get to the bottom of how we move beyond that, because we have to move beyond it. I may be your employee, but I am not your property. I will not do what I'm told because I'm your employee, and solely for that reason. I am trained to fulfill this function and to do the work that I'm currently working very hard to do efficiently and effectively. And I want to work in partnership with the board, not in opposition with the board. But that cannot happen as long as we continue to be passive aggressive, not tell the truth, and not work as one body and actually pick up the phone and say, hey, Carmela, why didn't you have so-and-so happen at convocation? Or, hey, Carmela, why didn't you do X, Y, Z? We have a policy that says that we'd like you to do that. That has not been my experience. My experience has been to be harangued with an agenda in public, online, in the face of the entire world, including my family, while trying to establish myself as a member of this community. I want that to stop. I want all of this behavior to stop. The kids are watching. The parents are watching. I am speaking right now. And I want it to stop because we can be so much better. This community expects us to be better. They have hope. They have expectation. They have excitement. What I saw at convocation wasn't a group of tired, paranoid, horrified, I don't want to be in Bridgeport anymore. I saw people who were excited about being here, want to do what's right for kids, want to give more to our kids. But our board has to decide that they want to work with me to do that. And we all have to be aligned in that. And if we have an issue, we can address that privately. We don't have to come in front of television cameras to do that. We do not need to behave in ways that are beneath how we expect to be treated ourselves. Do not have to do that. And so this piece of communication is critical. I want more from this board, just like I'm asking for more from our teachers and staff and our students. I want more. I want to be treated with the same level of courtesy and respect that I have provided to each of you since I've arrived in Bridgeport. And I want all of the talk about past and what has happened before and what you want to prevent. I haven't been part of any of that. I'm not part of anyone's clique, group, any of that. You hired me. Whether you voted for me or not, you hired me. Let me do my job. Give me an opportunity to succeed or fail, but give me an opportunity. And if you're going to critique me, help me. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Mr. Copeland? Sorry, give me just a second, Mr. Sokolovic.
Yes, I would like to address that. There was several statements in there, including calling out lies, disrespects, and personal attacks. So now we gotta stop talking hypotheticals, we gotta start talking in reality. There was a finance meeting where I had on the agenda questioning an expenditure, which is my right as a board member. Questions were asked, was policy followed? Answer that question, it should be yes or no. And if a problem was found with the paperwork and you asked the question about that paperwork, that is not a personal attack. That is my role as finance chair, questioning the expenditures, especially with a new superintendent who could possibly be led astray by certain individuals in the city and be given bad information, which it turns out on the documentation, it seems to be bad information. That's not a personal attack. That's questioning the expenditure. Where it became personal was Dr. Levy David took it personally. She interrupted the speaker and she did not follow Robert's Rules of Order because she felt personally attacked because I was questioning the paper. I just had my hand up right now to get the attention of the board chair to speak. And Dr. Levy Davis said, I'm talking. I'm talking. That's how you get recognized to speak. You raise your hand for the chair to speak. The superintendent does not run the meetings. The superintendent cannot come and cut off a speaker, especially a board member. The chair recognizes, like right now, everybody's quiet, but if somebody was wanted to say something, they would raise their hands. And then when I was finished speaking, the floor would go to whoever wants to speak next. That's policy and protocol. And Dr. Levy Davis said, okay, oh, wow. Might be right, or, oh, wow, I disagree with you. Would have been a non-issue. It would be over. Instead, I got people in the community accusing me of attacking a woman of color. And let me tell you something, I'm going to continue to question everything that I see that might not be right. Hopefully it won't happen a long time, but we've got things that we got to question. We're fiduciaries of the taxpayer. I'm going to question the superintendent as much as I questioned the last white Caucasian superintendent that we had. Over a lot of stuff, and it might be big dollar amounts, it might be small dollar amounts. Me and Mr. Benahan been questioning family dollar spending at the school level to ensure that we were actually holding meetings. So it's not personal. If every time the question is asked and it's taken as personal, every time there's a disagreement on the piece of paper and it's taken personal and it's brought to the next level, that's not my problem. My problem is answering to the taxpayers and the fiduciary, as a fiduciary for the city of Bridgeport taxpayer. And this is the way I've been doing things for the past 6 years. And if there's an agenda item, we need the data for that agenda item, and it's got to be brought. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's not a personal attack. And I'm sorry you see that way, Dr. David, but kind of brought all the attention onto yourself because had you not interrupted the speaker, there would be no back and forth. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to speak this, and this is not something about talking nobody because everybody has his own opinion, and I respect everybody's opinion and comment and vote, whatever. But for the record, I can say so far, and I can say on the day I remember we had one of the former superintendent of school until, I guess, Ramos until now. I can say I really have to respect and take it out of my hat to Dr. Levy Davis. For the short time she's here for 30 days, and put it said 30 days, she do things that others former superintendent never did. And I'm talking because I'm for almost 20 years in the district. I see so many superintendent of schools, so many staff, and now I think how the communication work. That you, Mr. Joseph, talk about the policy protocol. I agree with you because you good in that. And we have to follow policy. But as a board member, I'm not here to see and Dr. Davis not doing her job. I know so far she's doing what she has to do, and as I said, and I told everyone, we have to let her do the job. And we have a better communication. Yes, we have a much better communication. But I know by my spirit what I see when I hear, when I talk to Dr. Davis, and I heard what, and I still remember And I put it there for the record when she say, I marry you. So all the people, they did the convention, and the way she communicated, and so far when I communicate with her, she gave me an answer. People are happy. And I'm going what the community wants. If the community, my parents, staff, and students that happy, that's what I'm going for. That we are perfect? No. Do we have a little bit much communication? Yes. That she had good plans, she had good things for Bristol School? Yes. That I know some people, and I'm talking about city people, fine. They want her, they want to sit down with her, they want to do this for her, but I like when she say, no, I'm not realistic. I'm here to work with the student. If you're going to help me with the students, with the staff, my parents, let's have it. But we don't have to deal with that because I heard people came to me and told me, wow, you have a superintendent that care about Bristol School. That's the only thing I want to say for the record, that I respect Dr. Living Davis. I know nobody's perfect, as I said, but I know she's trying to do the best. And as I said before, she had 9 board members that we just had to support her. We had to work with her, and we had to defend her. That's only I want to say that, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Baptiste Perez?
Mr. Copeland, I just have a statement to say that Bridgeport Board of Education, our meetings are on YouTube. We have a national presence when we're doing a national search. There's a reputation that comes with this board that may be negative. And when there are individual board members that are condescending upon the leader of our district and making agenda items regarding what could have been resolved with a phone call, and this goes to part of the hypothetical with oversharing information because the information was readily available. It was communicated. However, my concern is I want to see Bridgeport Public Schools succeed. And I don't want the reputation of this board or egos of individual members to come at the consequence that demoralize not only our superintendent, but our staff their best foot forward. I think we need to be clear, transparent, truly open the line of dialogue with each other. And like, there are 2 particular instances which happened just now with a colleague. But even just knowing it, the teachers union wasn't at the convocation, that was something that could have been discussed as a Democratic caucus. That's something that could have been discussed board member to board member. But I feel like subtle jabs at that is what makes this board reputation seem volatile and toxic. And I believe that we should be better. We can do better because we're the role models for this district. And so I think we need to just work a lot better. Like the chair has mentioned, we have a few training sessions coming up, and I'm hopeful that we can all respectfully agree to disagree, but realize that our actions give a national presence that speaks volumes. And we're trying to attract teachers to come to this district. We want to be mindful of our great staff, our IT staff, our superintendent staff that's here in the office today. I appreciate them because some of the ways this board has been functioning historically has been negative, but I believe we can rise together and move forward so we can actually be leaders for this district.
Thank you. Okay, so Mr. Traber, then Mr. Gelland, then I would like to continue on with our presentation. Mr. Traber?
I just gotta say, the only ones I hear calling anybody names here are not us. And I'm a little tired of this. I don't hear any name calling coming out of this. I didn't hear any mention of the teachers union, Ms. Baptiste Perez. So I don't know where you heard the teachers union mentioned. So I think that we just need to communicate better. I don't disagree with that. And let's stop with this. The past can't be ignored. The past has to be taken into account. The past can't dictate what we do in the future. So I think we need to be aware of the past in oh so many ways, and we need to not let it control our future. And I don't think there's anyone in this room, I'm offended, frankly, to hear anyone suggest that anyone in this room would want to call out anyone who wants to serve on the Board of Ed and spend the enormous amount of time and commitment to do so as not caring and wanting to see this district succeed. I assume everyone who sits at this table wants to see this district succeed. And if you don't, it just shocks me. So we're all here for the same purpose of seeing this district succeed. We may have different opinions about how best to do that, but I'm assuming we're all here. And as I said a moment ago, I want to see Dr. Carmela Levy David succeed. My vote has nothing to do with whether or not I want her to succeed. And my first words to her when I met with her were that that's what I want to see happen. Because it's in the interest of the children of this district to see her succeed. So any disagreements I have with her are not related to whether or not the overall goal of her success is in my goals. So I don't, we get into this hypothetical and these suggestions that are just irrelevant to this discussion. We all want to see this district succeed and we all want to move it forward. And we may disagree at different times about certain actions, but we got to stop with the grandstanding and get back down to the reality of how we want to handle things and move forward. So I think that's where we want to go. And I guess that's where I want to leave things.
Thank you, Mr. Gellin.
I went to mass on Sunday and the priest saying, I feel your actions. I don't speak much when it comes to, I like to keep it business and, make sure that we go on things and move on. But I'm not happy with what I'm seeing here. Us, this is us. The whole board is us. It's not two individuals are us, not the rest. We're not cliques, we're not group, we're one board. We need to start acting as one board and leave the pettiness aside. I'm sitting here watching. When I heard the community speak a couple weeks ago, part of me felt they were speaking out of line, and I didn't really see this dysfunctional board. But I'm crossing that line. We lose great talent. We will chase folks away, and we will just be an embarrassment. We need to conduct business as business. If we have any personal issues, fine. Let's go out for drinks and discuss it. Fine, we could do that. But for here, for the public, for what we're doing for our students, our teachers, this community, we need to do better. Period.
Thank you. Mr. Copeland, you can continue.
Okay, go to the next slide. I think we've talked about these. We can skip that. Go to the next one.
Oh, that's it, Mr. Copeland. I believe that's all. Oh, no, wait, there should be more.
Oh, no, there's more. There's more.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Just go to the next one. Yep. So tonight begins the goal setting process. It doesn't end it by any stretch of the imagination. I would recommend that the board and the superintendent come together on 3 or 4 overarching goals. I had a conversation with the superintendent and the board chair. There are areas that I think CABE, Connecticut Association of Boards of Education, can work with you on. But from my understanding, there are no state mandated goals. So they're for you. Then when you've come up with those 4 overarching goals, you want to let the superintendent go back and confer with their cabinet or other involved staff about mapping out a strategic plan for that, and then return to the board for final agreement and approval. Now, I think, Madam Board Chair, I think you asked board members to come with some goal suggestions.
Right. Also, too, I've asked IT to add, what we did in the past was, when it came to evaluation, there was a form in which we evaluated the past superintendent on, and underneath those evaluation points, I don't know if board members have seen this, if you could just swap out real quick.
Well, let me take you to the end of this, and then
Okay.
it'll be a little bit easier. So once
Sure.
the goals are in place, then next slide, I'm sorry, is your performance assessment. You've done this before, so you're
Correct.
aware of the evaluation procedures. I have this in here because you would be surprised at the number of boards who have gone years without evaluating the superintendent, but you've done it, so I don't need to beat that dead horse. You've got a process, you work with it. One of the things that I do say, though, particularly in the beginning of a superintendent's tenure, what we thought was going to be a really big goal, and then other ones emerged. And so in every place I've been, I've come to the board in January and said, I'd like to amend the goals because this is what I'm seeing now that I've got 5 or 6 months in the district. And I just recommend that you be open to that. And then the last slide talks about the performance evaluation, and then finally our advertisement. So let me stop, and then you can click on to your other ones.
Correct. There's no action being taken on tonight. I do think that you guys we can have conversation about these areas of goals that we want as a board, and we can come back and actually have a meeting where we set those goals for the superintendent, because there are no action items tonight. But I do hope that each of you would have an opportunity so we can discuss that as a board of what those areas will be, and then we put it into written document, we agree upon it as superintendent and board, and that's what we'll start out. The reason why this was not done in the very beginning is because we were onboarding new board members at the time, and I didn't think it was fair. And you guys will, when the election comes, you guys will add new board members. And when those new board members come, those items may change based off of their viewpoint, or how they may choose not to participate. But out of respect for the superintendent, I didn't think it was fair to start that without having at least partially functioning board, because we didn't have a stable set of board members. We had one leave, we added a new one in, and I didn't think that was fair. So anyone questioning that is my reasoning as to why I waited to speak with Dr. Levy-David and the firm so we could start off the next phase. There's a problem with that, and there's a problem with that, but I just want to make it clear, I didn't think it was feasible to the board to do that without having at least a majority here. What we can do, Mr. Copeland, IT, if you can please pull up what we used in the past to that's the one. We used in the past to evaluate superintendents. Underneath those are goals that was presented to us. This is just a template. This is not something that the board has to adopt again. The board before new board members came on, we adopted this as a template that we would use to evaluate the previous superintendent. And we also used part of this to evaluate the interim superintendent at the time. This is not something we have to agree to again. There could be our own, we can come up with our own, or we can go to CAVE, we can go to CAF, we can go to whoever we want to go to that specializes in evaluating superintendents. And even if Mr. Copeland has some ideas that you want to present to the board members will decide on what is the best template. But the reason why I chose to present this template is underneath the template. It's not in there, guys. I'll have Ms. Rita send it to you guys, or I'll send it to you guys after. What is underneath in the middle of them, and you'll see them when it comes to you. I might do it right now if I have a chance. Is that there's small little points under there that kind of speaks to, like, if communication. One area was communication in the superintendent. How is the superintendent's communication with the board? Underneath those areas were small bullet points that kind of addresses what those areas were. Board members had a chance to evaluate the superintendent based off of that. That was my reason of presenting it to you guys. But I will open up the floor and we'll go one by one and we can discuss.
Can I ask a question before you?
Yes.
So this is the evaluation template you used, correct?
Correct. Yeah, this is the template. Inside of it is the points that I wanted board members to see. We're not evaluating the superintendent tonight, and I'm not saying that we're going to use that, but give them an idea because we do have new board members here who may not know some of the goals that came underneath that.
But is there a separate set of macro goals, district?
No,
goals?
there isn't. That's what we're gonna discuss. We're gonna hopefully discuss today, and then meet again to establish what those will look like for the board and superintendent.
Have you had those macro goals in the past?
Say that again?
Have you had macro goals in the past?
Mr. No, we haven't. No.
Dr. Johnson.
Yeah, we haven't.
Okay. So those,
that's
what I would suggest you sort of contemplate
Mhm.
going forward. These are pretty standard, evaluative indicators. But so for example, when I started my last district, the district was the fastest growing district in the state of Pennsylvania. Handling enrollment growth was going to be a goal. It just was. That's a big goal. And they could say, well, how are you going to handle that? And I'm like, it's September. I have the faintest idea. You could give me some time to put some things together to strategize how to handle enrollment growth. But that's a goal that's not going away. Those are the kinds of, and it relates to facilities and so forth and so on. That's kind of what I was suggesting. Yeah.
Yep, you're absolutely correct. So, board members, if you want to take a moment and maybe think before we go down the line, or however the case may be, just some goals that you may have in mind. We can agree to disagree on some of them. As I said, we will come back again and put them onto paper. But I believe Mr. Copeland's suggestion was to identify three or four goals that we can present and work in harmony with the superintendent to accomplish.
And the superintendent should also articulate what she thinks. Yeah. Okay.
Correct. So you're ready?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead,
Mr. Copeland, I can't read what's up on the screen. And
I'll send it to you.
I know you will. So I'm not referring to anything up on the screen. You apparently can read it.
No, not that well.
Oh, okay. But it's far away and tiny for me. And I thought the youngster next to me had it on her screen, but she didn't either. So I heard reference, and I do vaguely remember I did not participate in the end of year review of the interim superintendent because I had not been on board long enough to feel I had a meaningful input to offer. But I do believe I heard reference a moment ago to communication as one of the goals or measuring points. What's the difference between that and your reference to a macro goal?
So,
can you give some idea what a macro goal is versus good communication?
Yeah, when I looked at this, and I could only read the top, like educational leadership, communication, finance. Those are typically things that we see as indicators for an evaluation document. This is very similar to what boards used in New Jersey. Boards in Pennsylvania use something completely different, and other states completely different from that. But those are evaluation indicators. Now, there can be some overlap. So, for example, if I'm doing, let's stick with my last experience. If I'm doing one of the goals was handling enrollment growth. Well, there were some overlap issues that had to do with finance, that had to do with facilities, that fit into some of these smaller indicators. In terms of communication, I developed a series of superintendent forums that fit into that, but communication was not a macro goal. So let me give you an example. One goal was handling enrollment growth. Another goal was dealing with the achievement gap. A third goal was program evaluation. A fourth goal was something I can't remember. It's been 2.5 years. So those were the sort of macro goals that we had. There were certainly indicators that fell under that, but it was the macro goals that I could take back to the cabinet, and I could say, this is where this is our focus, as opposed to sort of evaluative management goals. Does that make sense?
Does it make sense? So I have a question. One area that I don't even know, the board may agree or disagree. One of the things that we heard on the tour was diversifying teachers amongst the district. Is that considered a macro goal?
Yeah, I mean, to get a diverse,
It's a tough one, but it's a needed one. So
well, it's here's what I'm going back to since I wrote the stakeholder report. There was a lot of talk about, for instance, retention, recruitment and retention of staff.
Got it.
One of the ways to handle that is to have a diverse part of the retention and recruitment of staff could be that. Or you could have a completely separate macro goal of diversifying, of bringing together a diverse staff. That really is something you could battle out. Personally, I would argue for the recruitment retention because it allows me the flexibility of having strategies that talk about in the recruitment, how am I going to recruit a diversified staff?
That makes perfect sense. I think my personal one will be that one. But I'll go around and board members can share their thoughts. Ms. Baptiste-Perez.
In terms of a macro goal, the financing of the district is always a big issue. We have our own Bridgeport Foundation that I believe the previous finance reports didn't raise any money. So I would like to see different initiatives aimed at raising finances for our own foundation, as well as additional funds and grants for the district.
I know that was a lot to unpack. Is there like a overarching fundraise? Mr. Sokolovic?
Yeah, I'm gonna go around finance as well. I think we need to have an overarching goal to basically right-size our district. It's coming because we are approaching the fiscal cliff and we should be making preparations as basically plans for maybe $10 million reduction in services, $5 million. So plan for the worst and hope for the best.
So would you say to Ms. Baptiste-Perez, fundraising / grants, something with grants?
No, I'm talking about the other side. I'm talking about prepare for the worst case scenario. I think she's more towards trying to avoid the worst case scenario by raising additional funds, which is a good goal as well. And hope her goal is more.
So we
need a plan for disaster, because we keep kicking the can down the road. I think might be okay for 24, 25, but if we don't start planning for the worst now, it's going to be less than.
So what's the term we would want to identify that as? Mr. Gunn.
A budget, maybe for the year, fair budget for upcoming year, 2024, 25, or 25, 26.
Yeah, I mean, we just start identifying cuts, just redistricting plans, and just everything that's involved with. Tomorrow we don't have $10 million to meet our budget, so we're not just running and scrambling.
Would you like to? Go ahead.
Can we go around and brainstorm? Just.
Yep. We'll come back. So I wrote it down. I'll come back to you, Mr. Benahan.
I guess I'm going back now because I'm taking notes. So.
Mr. Traber.
I like the money one. I'm going to call it the money one because I think what Joe's raising is one aspect. I think Mr. Sokolovic is raising is one aspect. What Ms. Baptiste-Perez is raising is one aspect. I think sort of trying to deal with the financing gap that we have. We had an initiative we passed in the late spring that we started to move on over the summer. If we had all the money in the world we wanted, what would we be doing? You know, that sort of, utopic view of what would we be doing as a district if we had the kind of money that we would want to have, knowing that we don't. And you're looking at the worst case scenario somewhat in your view, and I'm not trying to restrict any of those views. I'm trying to say, we do have this need to deal with, and Ms. Baptiste Perez is raising some other aspects of that, I think, if I understood what she was suggesting. So I'm just saying that if I understand what macro goals are from Mr. Copeland, it's this big finance gap that we have as an urban district has to be dealt with. And so I think that's the macro goal that I see, is dealing with it in so many ways, not just coming up with a budget, not just getting more grants, not just filling this utopic view, but just sort of the, coming up. So I think that's important. I like the staffing one in the broader sense, because retention of veteran staff is critically important. In my mind, we have been a training district for as long as I can remember, 30 years that I watched it. Teachers stay here for 5 to 10 years and then move on. And to keep those teachers would be great. And I do agree completely with the diversification of the workforce and figuring out ways to also diversify. Although Bridgeport is the most diverse workforce in the state, we want to improve on that because it's still not good enough to reflect the students in our district. So we want to improve on that. And that includes exploring something that we've talked about in this district for years about how to help our paras become teachers and, improve their lives as a part of that, because most of them are Bridgeport residents. So there's a whole raft of things in that area that we can look at. And then I think the communication stuff that we've been bandying around tonight about our need to improve that has got to be in there. Because obviously we have dissatisfaction from different points of view about how we are or are not communicating well in this district. And I think that pervades at multiple levels with staff and the community and this level.
Okay. Ms. Perez?
In terms of the finances, is it possible to do or to make a goal for like an audit, forensic audit or something, to see where our money's going? And
Yes. I know what I was writing down, and it doesn't have to be this name or whatever. I was saying fiscal gaps in procurement of funds. Something like that can be like the overarching umbrella, and obviously if we want to do legs underneath it, then that can identify all the small areas like that, the budget of the year, what that's going to look like. But she just needs an overarching area.
and then education, and then recruitment and retention of teachers or staff, I should say, and then as a social worker, improving social emotional health.
Say it again.
I'm bringing my social worker about improving social emotional health, especially post-pandemic. We have a lot of students who have trauma in the home and anxiety, depression that are going unnoticed in the district. And I just want to make a goal around that where we can really start addressing those needs.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Gillen?
But I think we're taking a deep dive into curriculum and to see where the gaps are we up, the 2023 standards, to see where we can improve. Where are we? And if we're not meeting our goals, can we, implement?
So the goal would be the curriculum, and then underneath there will be goals within the curriculum. Okay. Ms. Casimir?
I like the idea of encouraging paras to become teachers. I really love the idea that Ms. Perez brought up about having an audit done. I just wish that I would have thought of that sooner. Thank you, Ms. Perez. So that's important to see exactly where monies have been going. As you know, I mean, not far, not 50 years back, but I would love to see at least within the last 10 years, or 5 years, if possible, where has the money been going, that the district has been spending, and just, again, communication with the board, relations with the Board of Education. And that's all I have.
Perfect. Wait, hold on, I need to go back to Mr. Vivian.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Listen to each one of you, and the most important for me, you guys know what's my passion, but everybody have to know, is our parents, our students. Without parents, we don't have a student. Without students, we don't have board education. We don't have nobody. So it's very good to have something communicate with them more, how to training them, support them, so they can know what we do. We know we have policies, the doors open for the school, but sometimes they don't have that. But I know Dr. David fixed that already. I appreciate that. But we need to support more our parents, because sometimes parents, they have 2 jobs, 3 jobs. And we have to understand, you're not there, but at least we're there for them to be sure the students, have support. And I'm going back with the paraprofessionals that we know they do a lot. Paraprofessionals, they cross the line. Sometimes they do things that sometimes they don't supposed to do, but they do it because they love it. They support. We need to help them more, help them to get more training or get more certified. And the most important, let's appreciate what they do, because sometimes they don't tell you a thank you to the paraprofessional, but they do a lot. They do things that sometimes we say, wow, I didn't know you can do that. But they say, I do it because it's my passion, because I like it, because I want to. I just want to put that for the record. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I was going to add, maybe give it a name of some sort, and then you can obviously list underneath, I'm thinking supportive, district supportive needs.
Is it me or did the screen freeze?
Something happened because I couldn't hear.
Is there any way you can call him back? Oh, there you go. Mr. Copeland, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to go Mr. Sokolovic, then Ms. Baptiste Perez, then Mr. Geller.
Right, a couple of quick things. We do have an RFP coming out for an enhanced audit. It's ready to send out clear legal. It should be on the agenda of the next regular meeting. And as far as social emotional piece, I love it. Family piece, I love it. What we got to remember as a board, when we're evaluating these goals, it's important to remember we're not evaluating if the goal was actually attained, at least for me anyway. Because say for instance, we go with diversity piece. Mm-hmm. We can't say because superintendent did not meet a 2% or 3% increase in, say, African-American or Hispanic teachers or whatever category we're looking at, that she has failed in her goal. What we need to look at is the process that she took to get there. If the process and the attempts were made and it's able to be displayed, in my opinion, that's a good grade on that goal and objective. And as far as everything else, especially with students on campus, because me and Mr. Benahan, I have struggled with that for years, trying to get more involved. So we can't say if the superintendent doesn't get more involved that she failed. But what we've been measuring in the schools is you could take a measurement that it's within her power. If all the monies are expended, or if meetings were being held, or if outreach and emails were sent, or whatever have you, that's a good metric to use rather than at a meeting and X amount of people showed up or X amount of people showed up, because that's, as we know as advocates, sometimes don't have people showing up to our.
Ms. Baptiste Perez.
I just probably have another layer under diversification. I think we should really focus, understand the diversity aspect of it, but more the diversification of skills for English language learners. So on day one of school, students who are new to the country, to the district, English may not be their first language, that they actually have the resources to succeed and learn that new language. So I think that's critical, regardless of the teacher's maybe racial or ethnic background. The ability to communicate with our students, to actually get the information across and teach them, I think is something that we have to be very critical, because there's over 40 languages, probably well beyond over 40 languages. I remember one report may have said actually 88 different languages spoken in Bridgeport. And so truly, if we want a district where no child is being left behind or socially promoted, day one, they need to have a teacher or the resources available where they can learn the language. Because I've learned myself, it takes several years, 7 years to learn a new language. Seven. So if we have a child in first grade that doesn't speak English, resources can't stop in elementary school if we truly want each child to succeed.
Thank you. Mr. Gellin.
Yeah, I'm gonna actually bring up the English language learners aspect of things. It's also maybe looking at how many goals do we have so far? I don't want to overburden.
No, what I'm looking at this as is listing the different areas, and obviously we would need to bucket them anyway, because some of them are going to sound the same, some of them are going to need a specific area, but just listening to what everyone has.
Okay. Just brainstorming, probably omit some out, like I don't overwhelm.
Oh, no, you're fine.
Well, I guess certainly with in terms of safety in schools, so something along those lines, whether the goal is assessing I guess the safety grade, and then a plan to address it. The plan doesn't have to be implemented this year, but kind of doing an assessment, present an assessment, and probably developing a plan to address it.
So I believe everyone has gone. Oh, Mr. Chair, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that as I heard Mr. Sokolovic try and talk about the evaluation phase, we're on the macro goal phase.
Correct.
We're not at the point of figuring out how we're going to measure it.
Correct.
So we're not getting to that point. We're just right up here in the clouds, talking about areas that we might want to try and aim for. And as I understand from years of teacher evaluation, we're going to then get Dr. Libby Davis' feedback on what she's looking to do and thinks works for her. And then we're going to set that. And as Bobby just said, as Ms. Brown just said, put these in the buckets and figure out the sort of categories within those. And then having done that, figure out how we're going to measure those, what's an appropriate way to measure those. So we don't want to get ahead of ourselves in any way. So I think your point is correct, but we're not even getting there. We're just
brainstorming,
dreaming right now about sort of what things we want to look at. And I like the way you finished that last one by saying, let's look at this one maybe for setting it up for the next year. Some of those may end up being like that.
Mr. Sokolovic?
Yes, Dr. Levy-David, do you have any goals you would like to add?
I actually really liked all of those goals that I heard brainstormed. And I think that those are all goals that we can definitely aspire to developing well. If there was one goal that I would really add, it would be just a greater level of accountability with partnerships in our district. Those organizations that are actually serving our kids and are actually in our schools, knowing who they are, what kids they're serving, what resources they're using, whether or not they're licensed, research-based. I just want to make sure that our kids are engaging with people that are actually safe, reputable, and are doing things that are great for kids.
That's really good. What I'm gonna suggest is, like, tonight we just brainstorm. I'll see at another time within the next week or so. We'll put together a meeting and we'll flesh out these so that we can actually put them in the buckets that they go in. And she's walking away with at least 4 that we as a board can agree to, and then all the legs that go underneath. I'm a very visual person. So if that makes sense. Does that make sense? All right. Definitely. Are you okay? I'm going to just recite them again for the record for anyone who didn't get on. The next one is, the first one we talked about is recruitment and retention of staff. And then obviously we could diversify all those areas. Skills for ESL diversification. So what those skills look like when we're diversifying education with English language learners. I think this is one in itself, fiscal gaps and procurement of funds that can go under finance. Communication, I put communication / board relations / community relations. So communication amongst the board, communication amongst the community. What does that look like for the superintendent? Social emotional health, curriculum goals, and then we can flesh that out more. Fiscal audit, that can go right up to finance when we're talking about the fiscal gaps. Parental district support areas, which covers Mr. Benahan's area. Safety and assessment within the schools, what that looks like. And then accountability with community partners and programs. So that, I think that covers all the ones that we've addressed. I will make sure to send these to Rita. And then we can get them in our portal as areas that we discuss as a board. And then the next week or so after our meeting with, no, that's the end of the month, but in the next week or so, we'll schedule a meeting so we can actually sit down and make these actionable and with record. So any other thoughts, concerns?
Can I just close out and say,
Hold on, Mr. Copeland, Dr. Levy David wants to share something.
Just as I was thinking of the communication piece, if we could embed in that the branding and the marketing piece that is so critical for a lot of the programs that we have in the district, that people don't understand what we offer or don't know the program exists or how it benefits their kids. I want to make sure that we work on that in the communication piece.
Got it. Okay. Mr. Copeland?
I really enjoyed hearing that, and I think it was good for the superintendent to hear what's on your mind, to hear where your values are and what it speaks to. I heard first. Oh, and let me also speak to Mr. Sokolovich and his comments about the metrics. I have been for a long time, I've quoted Bill Walsh, who was coach of the San Francisco 49ers, and it kills me to quote him because I'm a lifelong Jets fan. But at any rate, he wrote a book once that was called "The Score Will Take Care of Itself." And what he really meant was, we're not going to sit here and talk about how many games we're going to win, we're going to talk about what our preparation is, and the score will take care of itself. And so I just wanted to echo that. I heard 3 actually overarching goals. One was concerned about long-term fiscal stability in the district, which is
yes.
What I call that. The second thing I heard was recruitment and retention of staff. These are big things. What I didn't hear, I would argue, would be the third thing, which would be a strategic plan. Because what I heard, all those other things falling under is a long-term 5-year strategic plan that talks about safety in schools, not just safety in terms of safety in terms of physical safety, but health and wellness safety. How do we handle students who are coming into the district new? How do we look at our academic program to make sure that the curriculum is matching what we need and that our teachers are given the support that they are for the enrollment? So I heard a lot of value statements that I would normally hear in a strategic plan. I don't know if you've got one, or if it's an active plan, but I would argue strongly for the development of a strategic plan, which is going to take a full year to do, as something you may want to consider for superintendent goals. Just a thought.
I think you spoke well on that. That's actually something that board members in the middle of the superintendent search process was one of the questions that we asked candidates was, what would be your plan for the district? And I think, to be honest, all of the areas that we spoke about, to your point, covers that strategic plan. So maybe in itself, I'll add that as one of the items along with the fiscal one. So we got 3, and maybe when we meet together, we'll come up with the 4th one.
And the fourth one, too, may be, particularly for a new superintendent, to build on that issue of community communications. Different than the board goal, maybe, of board's administrative communications, but certainly getting I would argue you want your new superintendent out in the community talking about the school district, and maybe the development of a marketing strategy that goes along with that. That's not an uncommon goal for a first-year superintendent.
Okay. Well, if there are no further comments, thank you, Mr. Copeland, for joining us tonight. Thank you for your presentation. At this moment, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. I'm going to give it to Ms. Baptiste Perez. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Benningham. Any comments or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Yeah.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, motion carries. Everyone have a good night, and
Thank you, Doctor.
All right.